Her ex-husband let the room treat her like she had nothing left. Mrs. Whitaker, member guests, check in on the lower level. Meredith Sloane said it softly, with a smile trained well enough to pass for kindness. Talia Brooks stopped with one hand on the reception table. Across the room, Caleb was already laughing with two bored donors. His new partner Brielle beside him in a cream suit that caught every light. No one corrected Meredith, no one even looked uncomfortable. Talia lifted her eyes to the name badge Meredith held out. It said guest, Brooks, Talia said. I use Brooks. Meredith's smile tightened. Of course, Miss Brooks. Caleb glanced over, saw the badge, and looked away like it had nothing to do with him. The Institute knew how to make exclusion look tasteful. Gold pins for founding members, private elevator cards, staff who could tell the difference between a sponsor, a spouse, and someone being politely managed out of the way. Meredith stepped closer, lowering her voice. The upper reception is limited tonight. Legacy partners, executive sponsors, and current member leadership. Talia looked past her toward the glass stairs. I'm familiar with the layout. I'm sure you are, Meredith said, still pleasant. But since things have changed, we're being careful with access. Things meaning the divorce. Meaning Caleb's room now, not hers. A man behind them paused just long enough to hear it, then followed Meredith's cue and moved around Talia without apology. Brielle noticed the pause before Caleb did. Her smile stayed in place, but her fingers tightened lightly around his sleeve. Is everything okay? She asked. Caleb gave her the easy answer first. Just a check-in mix-up. Then to Talia, with that public warmth he used when he wanted credit for being gracious. Tal, you should come down after the remarks. It'll be less crowded. Less crowded meant less visible. Brielle looked at Talia then. Not unkindly, but with the careful confidence of a woman everyone had already welcomed. Someone nearby murmured how good Caleb looked these days. How happy. Talia heard it. Brielle heard it too. Only Caleb pretended it was harmless. On the wall beside the reception desk, a digital display cycled through the Institute's milestones. Caleb appeared in 3 photographs, shaking hands, speaking on panels, smiling beside executives who loved a polished room. Meredith pointed toward the screen. Caleb's been such a strong ambassador for us. Talia's gaze held on a date near the bottom. The launch cohort, the first leadership curriculum, the first corporate partnership framework. Small details most people would pass without noticing. That photo's mislabeled, Talia said quietly. The pilot wasn't in May, it was March. Meredith blinked. Unsure Communications has it right. Caleb gave a short laugh. Talia always had a memory for details. Details! As if history were a hobby she had kept after marriage. For a second, Talia could have said more. She could have named the room, the program, the decisions behind those smiling photographs. Instead, she adjusted the guest badge so it sat straight against her jacket. Meredith took that as surrender. Caleb did too. Talia saw it happen in their faces, the small easing. The relief of people who believed silence meant they had won something. Thank you for understanding, Meredith said. Talia looked at her. I didn't say I understood. The words landed softly, but not loudly enough to change the room. Meredith turned back to her list. Caleb returned to Brielle, and Talia remained exactly where they had placed her, close enough to be seen, not close enough to matter. Near the service corridor, Graham Ellis had gone still with a folder tucked under one arm. He didn't speak at first. He just looked from Talia's badge to Meredith's clipboard. And something in his face changed by half an inch. Julian Price came up beside him, calm as always, but his eyes found Talia before they found anyone else. Talia, Julian said, not loud, not casual either. Meredith glanced over. Julian, we're sorting reception access. I can see that, he said. Talia gave him the smallest shake of her head. Don't. Graham's jaw worked once, then he lowered his folder. The room kept moving, but the air around them didn't. Meredith recovered quickly. There's also a contribution dinner attached to the upper reception, she said. Some guests prefer not to be surprised by the numbers. The sentence was wrapped in courtesy, but everyone close enough understood the shape of it. Talia glanced at Caleb. He didn't step in. Brielle looked down at her champagne flute. suddenly very interested in the bubbles. I'm not easily surprised by numbers, Talia said. Meredith gave a small laugh as if Talia had made a brave little joke. Of course, we just want everyone comfortable. Comfortable meant not embarrassed, not exposed, not reminded of what she supposedly couldn't afford anymore. Talia's hand stayed steady at her side while the room quietly added money to the list of things it thought she had lost. By the time Talia stepped away from the desk, the upper reception had already swallowed Caleb, Brielle, and Meredith's confidence. Laughter lifted from the glass staircase like she had never been meant to follow it. Her phone buzzed. Denise. Baby, you alright? Talia stared at the message longer than she needed to. Then she typed, I'm fine, and didn't send it. Across the lobby, Graham was speaking quietly to Julian now. Meredith noticed, frowned, and looked back down at her list like the paper could reassure her. Talia put the guest badge in her coat pocket instead of wearing it. She left the lobby upright, steady and unseen, in exactly the way the room had chosen to see her. By Monday morning, the story had already cleaned itself up. No one said Talia had been turned away. They said she'd kept a low profile. They said divorce was hard. They said Caleb handled the evening with real grace. In a members-only group chat, someone wrote, it must be strange coming back after all that. Brielle reacted with a heart before deleting it. Caleb didn't comment at all, which was its own kind of comment. Talia heard the softer version at lunch from a consultant who thought he was being kind. I'm glad you're still connected here somehow. She set down her water glass. Somehow? He smiled, already wishing he'd chosen another word. Meredith's next email arrived with the subject line Updated Access Guidance. Talia read it once, then again. Her name wasn't in the leadership reception list anymore. She had been moved to general member programming, with a note that said former spouse access should be handled with sensitivity. Sensitivity, that was a useful word. It made disrespect sound like care. Julian appeared in her doorway 10 minutes later. Did Meredith send you the revised protocol? She sent everyone the revised protocol. His expression barely shifted. Graham's looking at it. Talia closed the email. He doesn't need to look too hard. He already is. That was all he said. But it was enough to tell her the paper trail had begun. Caleb found her near the conference corridor, away from the donors and cameras. Talia, can we not make this bigger than it is? She turned slowly. Who's making it bigger? He sighed like she had disappointed him by noticing. Meredith's trying to keep things clean. People are still adjusting. To what? To us not being us anymore. Talia looked at him then, really looked. You know that's not what this is? For a second, his charm thinned. Then he gave a small, careful smile. You've always had a way of taking things personally. Behind him, Brielle waited near the lounge entrance, watching both of them. Caleb didn't turn around. He didn't correct anything either. Brielle learned quickly which version of the story made people comfortable. At the next mixer, a sponsor told her, you and Caleb make sense. Fresh energy. She smiled because that was what the room wanted from her. He's been wonderful. Across the room, Talia spoke with an operations manager who leaned in like he trusted her answer more than anyone else's. Brielle noticed it. She also noticed Caleb noticing it, then looking away. Meredith touched Brielle's elbow. You're good for him. People can see he's moved forward. Brielle's smile held, but it felt heavier now. Moved forward from what? Exactly? Talia didn't glance over. That made it worse. She didn't look like someone trying to be replaced. Denise didn't ask about the institute when Talia came by that evening. She put tea on the table and waited until Talia stopped pretending to read the label. I saw a picture, Denise said. Talia's hand paused on the mug. Caleb and that young woman. People smiling like the whole story was simple. It's just a picture, Mom. No, it's not. Denise sat across from her. Not when everybody gets to decide what it means and you keep giving them silence to work with. Talia looked toward the window. I'm not explaining myself to people who already chose the easier version. Denise softened. I know. But baby, I can see what it costs you. The financial assumptions came dressed as logistics. Meredith called it a courtesy review of member commitments. She stood beside the billing coordinator's desk with her tablet angled, just enough for Talia to see the line item. With the transition, Meredith said, we wanted to make sure there wasn't any confusion about individual responsibility. Talia looked up. You mean payment? I mean access tied to account standing. Caleb, passing behind them, slowed but didn't stop. The coordinator looked mortified. Graham, 2 desks away, closed the file in his hand very carefully. Talia's voice stayed even. My standing isn't confused. Meredith gave her polished smile. Then this should be simple. It was simple. Just not in the way Meredith thought. Graham closed Meredith's access memo on his desk and removed his glasses. Julian stood by the window, arms folded. This isn't gossip anymore. No, Graham said. It's procedure now. The memo didn't name Talia as a risk. Not directly. That was the trouble with careful language. It could cut someone down and still look clean in a file. Julian nodded toward the document. She's creating categories that don't exist. She's creating exposure, Graham said. Neither man said what both of them knew. Not the full truth. Not aloud. But Graham opened a restricted folder on his tablet. And Julian stopped pacing. Outside that office, Meredith was still greeting members like nothing had shifted. Inside it, the Institute had started keeping score. By the end of the week, the wrong version had settled in like furniture. Meredith's staff used the new access language without hesitation. Caleb moved through receptions as if the room had always belonged to him. Brielle stayed beside him, beautiful and careful, while people treated her presence as proof that the divorce had a winner. Talia kept showing up when she needed to, calm enough for everyone to mistake her restraint for acceptance. Only the private corners had changed. Denise called more often. Julian watched more closely. Graham asked for documents no one outside legal thought to question. The public saw order. Talia saw a culture testing how far it could drift from the truth before the structure underneath had to answer back. The next problem came wrapped as a routine planning meeting. Meredith had adjusted the attendee list for a governance-facing sponsor session, moving Talia into observer status and giving Caleb a speaking slot under partner leadership. Graham read the list once and went quiet. Julian leaned over his shoulder. That can't stand. It shouldn't have been created, Graham said. Meredith, across the conference table, kept her pen poised. It reflects current visibility. We're trying to avoid confusion. Talia sat 2 seats away. Expression unreadable. Graham looked at the printed agenda again. Visibility isn't the same as authority. Meredith smiled like she thought he was being overly technical. That was when Talia understood the mistake had crossed from insult into paperwork. Talia reached for the agenda and turned it toward herself. The sponsor session can't open with partnership language, she said. Not before the governance review. You'll create a conflict between the funding narrative and the approval sequence. Meredith's pen stopped. Julian didn't look surprised. Graham looked down, but not fast enough. One of the staffers asked, So, we should reverse the order? Not reverse, Talia said. Separate. Sponsor remarks after compliance framing. Not before. And don't use legacy language for active oversight. The room went still in that specific way people do when someone knows more than they were supposed to. Meredith recovered first. That's very detailed feedback. Talia slid the agenda back. It's a detailed institution. Meredith sent a revised note within the hour. Not to Talia. Around her. The message thanked staff for helpful historical input and reminded everyone that final guest-facing decisions would remain with member relations. Talia read the phrase twice. Historical input. Julian appeared at her doorway. She's trying to turn your correction into a courtesy note. She can try. She also flagged your attendance for clearance review. Talia's face didn't change, but her hand closed over the edge of the desk. Graham called 30 seconds later. Julian put him on speaker. I need everyone to pause on Meredith's revised process, Graham said. No further access changes until legal reviews the classification. Talia looked at the phone. Meredith had wanted control. Instead, she had created a record. The pause order changed the room more than anyone wanted to admit. When Meredith approached the conference table, Graham didn't ask her opinion. He asked Talia whether she wanted the pending access language preserved for review. Talia looked at the printed memo. Preserve it. Julian took the copy from the coordinator before Meredith could reach for it. I'll make sure operations has the clean version. Caleb. standing near the doorway, caught the exchange and frowned. Since when does Talia approve internal handling? Graham's eyes lifted. No one said approve. No. Caleb said lightly. But everyone's acting like she does. Talia didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence around her had started sounding less like absence and more like restraint. Caleb caught Talia near the elevators after the briefing. You're letting them make this awkward, he said. Talia pressed the call button. Who's them? Julian, Graham, whoever's feeding this idea that you need special handling. She turned to him. That's what you think this is? I think you've been around this place a long time. And some people are being sentimental. His smile came late. It doesn't mean Meredith's wrong to set boundaries. Behind him, Briel slowed but didn't interrupt. Talia looked at Caleb for one clean second. You always did prefer the version of my work that made you look generous. The elevator opened. She stepped inside before he found an answer. Julian held the operations meeting with the door closed. No one raised their voice. But the room felt tighter than usual. Staff had questions about the access freeze, the sponsor agenda, the member relations note. They were small questions on paper. In practice, they all pointed back to Talia. One manager finally said, Are we supposed to follow Meredith's protocol or legal's pause? Julian folded his hands. You follow the Institute's standards. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that won't create a bigger problem. Later, Talia found him outside the copy room, rubbing one thumb against his knuckle. You don't have to carry this for me, she said. Julian looked at her. I'm carrying it for the place you built. Neither of them said more. They both knew that was the problem. The finance team flagged the discrepancy before member relations did. A payment status review had been attached to Talia's access profile. But the internal records didn't behave like a standard member account. The file routed to restricted finance, then bounced to Graham with 3 quiet priority markers. Meredith called it a systems issue. The billing coordinator didn't look convinced. Her profile isn't set up like the others. Meredith's smile sharpened. Then someone entered it oddly. Across the room, Caleb heard enough to slow down again. Is this about Talia? No, Meredith said too fast. It's administrative. Graham appeared at the finance doorway. It's not administrative if you're using the wrong classification. Talia, standing behind him, said nothing. But the insult had finally reached a ledger. Denise didn't tell Talia to be strong this time. She watched her daughter stand at the kitchen sink, still in work clothes, rinsing the same spoon twice. You know, Denise said, I spent half my career swallowing things so nobody could call me difficult. Talia turned off the water. I thought that made me dignified. Denise continued, sometimes it did. Sometimes it just made other people comfortable. Talia's shoulders stayed square. I'm not doing this for their comfort. I know, Denise came closer. But are you doing it for yours? That landed, not loudly, not like an accusation. Just enough to make Talia look down at her wet hands. After a moment she said, if I have to say it out loud. It feels like they win. Denise touched her wrist. Maybe they only win if they keep deciding what silence means. By the next morning, 3 different departments were waiting on legal before making routine decisions. Member relations wanted access clearance. Operations wanted agenda authority. Finance wanted the correct account classification. Each request looked separate until Graham placed them side by side. Talia stood in his office with Julian near the window. This is spreading, Graham said. Julian gave a short nod. Because the wrong assumption keeps getting reused. Outside, Caleb was laughing with 2 sponsors near the elevators. Meredith was moving between staff with her tablet tucked close to her chest. Briel stood beside the coffee bar, watching more than speaking. To them, the Institute still looked orderly. Inside Graham's office, the order had already failed. The public story was still standing. But now it had paperwork, money, and operations leaning against it from underneath. Graham waited until the door clicked shut before opening the risk file. This is no longer a personnel concern, he said. Julian stood behind the chair, silent. Talia looked at the folder title. Governance Accuracy Review. She let out a slow breath. That's where we are? That's where Meredith put us, Graham said. Then he corrected himself. Where the process put us, once her decisions entered the record. He didn't sound pleased. He sounded careful, which was worse. If access, finance, and public-facing authority are being assigned from an incorrect classification. He continued, I have to verify against governing documents. Talia looked away for a second. Julian said, This protects the Institute. Talia nodded once, then protect it. Graham's hand moved to the restricted file. Graham didn't rush the review. He checked the access memo against the governance binder. Then against the equity schedule, then against the authority matrix that only a handful of people ever had reason to open. Julian stood across from him, quiet for once. After a while, Graham turned the tablet toward Talia, not dramatically. Just enough. These categories don't match the documents, he said. Talia looked at the highlighted lines. Her own safeguards stared back at her, clean and exact. She had built them so no one could turn her work into somebody else's story. Now those same records were the only thing keeping the Institute from blessing the lie out loud. Outside legal, Caleb was still shaking hands like proximity meant power. Julian brought the operational history next. Not a speech, not a defense. Just records of who approved cohort design, who changed the sponsor model, who set the standards Meredith now claimed to protect. He placed the binder beside Graham's files. Legal shows authority, operations shows authorship. Talia looked at the binder but didn't touch it. Graham turned a page. These decisions predate most of the current member-facing structure. They predate Caleb's role here, Julian said. The sentence sat there. Plain and dangerous. Talia finally said, This cannot become about proving him small. It won't, Julian said. It's about proving the institution accurate. Outside the office, Meredith's team was still treating her protocol as the center of the world. Inside, the center had shifted back to the person it had always depended on. Meredith felt the shift before she understood it. By afternoon, she had Caleb positioned near the sponsor lounge again, smiling beside Brielle while staff watched for cues. We need to restore confidence, Meredith said, her voice low. Caleb adjusted his cuff. Then stop letting every internal pause look like a crisis. Across the room, Talia approached the registration desk. Meredith stepped forward with practiced warmth. Talia, we're keeping this area limited to current leadership-facing participants. Caleb glanced over but didn't move. Talia's gaze passed from Meredith to the sponsor badges on a table. And who determined that category? Meredith's smile stayed in place. Member relations. It sounded official. It also sounded like another sentence Graham would want preserved. Graham took the issue upstairs without calling it a complaint. He called it a governance accuracy concern. That phrasing got attention. By noon, 2 board-adjacent advisors had joined a closed call with Graham and Julian. No one asked whether Talia had been treated rudely. That wasn't the question that moved institutions. One advisor said, Are public access decisions conflicting with recorded authority? Graham answered, Potentially. Julian's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. Talia listened from the end of the table, hands folded, while people who had not watched the humiliation began recognizing the risk. No one outside that call knew anything had changed. In the lobby, Meredith was still directing name badges. Caleb was still being greeted like a center of gravity. Brielle caught Caleb checking his phone 3 times during the sponsor reception. Is everything okay? She asked. Fine, he said too quickly. Across the room, Meredith was laughing a little louder than usual. Talia stood near Julian, not performing anything, not chasing anyone, and still somehow pulling focus from people who knew better than to show it. Brielle lowered her voice. Why does it feel like everyone is avoiding saying something? Caleb gave her the smile he used with clients. Because people love drama around an ex-wife. Brielle looked at him for a beat too long. That answer should have comforted her. Instead, it made the whole room feel staged. For the first time, being beside Caleb didn't feel like proof. It felt like placement. Talia met Graham and Julian in a side conference room after the call. Graham closed the door. If this advances, the next step won't stay internal. I know. Julian watched her carefully. Nobody's asking you to perform for them. Talia gave a faint, tired smile. That's exactly what it feels like. For a moment, neither man answered. She looked down at the folder on the table. I protected the structure so my work wouldn't depend on anybody's memory. But if the structure has to speak now, it speaks for the Institute. Not for my pride. Not for Caleb. Not for Meredith's comfort. Graham nodded. Then we proceed on that basis. Talia's voice stayed quiet. Only on that basis. The formal platform came together under an ordinary name, Annual Governance and Capital Stewardship Update. That was the kind of title members respected without asking too many questions. Graham revised the disclosure sequence. Julian confirmed the operational materials. A senior advisor requested that ownership, authorship, and executive authority be represented accurately on the public agenda. Meredith received the updated event packet and frowned at the seating chart. Why is Talia listed near the governance delegation? She asked. Graham didn't look up from his notes. The final arrangement reflects institutional requirements. Caleb, copied on the packet, sent Meredith a separate text. Is this really necessary? Meredith typed back. I'll handle the room. Neither of them understood that the room was no longer the part that mattered. The packet went out before close of business. Not as a warning. Not as gossip. Just calendar invites, revised seating, disclosure notes, and a clean agenda with enough formal language to make people behave. Graham confirmed the records. Julian confirmed the operations sequence. A senior advisor signed off without ceremony. Talia read the final version alone in her office. Her name sat in places Meredith would not understand yet. Downstairs, Caleb was still being greeted like the room's natural center. Meredith still believed she could manage optics. Briel still watched the gaps in his confidence widen. Denise texted, "You all right?" Talia typed, "I will be." Then she set the phone down and looked at the agenda again. The truth had not arrived in public yet. But it had a time, a place, and a microphone. The governance update filled the main hall before 9. Members arrived in tailored suits. Low voices, expensive watches, all the quiet signals the Institute had taught them to trust. Meredith moved through the entrance with calm precision, placing people where she believed they belonged. Caleb entered with Briel at his side and received the usual warm attention. Then Talia walked in. The greeting around her changed, but only slightly. A pause here, a glance there. Some people still weren't sure whether to treat her as history, guest, or complication. Denise sat near the back, watching everything. Graham stood near the stage with the final packet in his hand. Julian gave Talia one brief nod. The room was still reading appearances. The agenda was about to read records. Meredith made one last adjustment at the entrance table. "Talia," she said warmly, "we've reserved general seating just past the center aisle. It may be more comfortable than the governance section." Several members heard it. That was the point. Caleb stood nearby with Briel, one hand in his pocket, watching without stepping in. Talia looked at the seating card in Meredith's hand. "Comfortable for whom?" Meredith blinked. "I'm only trying to keep the flow clear." Unsure. A sponsor glanced from Talia to Caleb. Then back again, reading the old story exactly the way Meredith offered it. Briel's smile held, but her eyes moved to Caleb. Talia took no seat. She simply waited while the room made its final mistake in public. When Graham stepped to the podium, the room settled into the kind of quiet that came from money and habit. He didn't open with welcome jokes. He opened with documents. "Before today's capital stewardship update," he said, "the Institute is required to clarify the authority structure governing ownership, equity control, executive approval, and founding authorship." Meredith's head lifted. Caleb's smile thinned, just a little. Graham continued, steady and dry. "For accuracy, rank in this matter is not determined by member visibility, partnership proximity, or guest-facing access. It is determined by recorded governance authority." The room shifted. People who had spent months reading status through posture and proximity suddenly had to listen for something harder to manipulate. Talia sat still, hands folded, while the language of the room changed without asking her to explain herself. Graham turned one page. The Institute's founding authority, majority ownership position, controlling equity interest and executive financial approval rest with Talia Brooks. For a second, the room did not understand what it had heard. Then Julian moved first, Not dramatically, just standing at the side of the room with the operational packet in hand. Denise's hand went to her chest. Brielle stopped breathing through her smile. Graham kept reading. Ms. Brooks is the founder of Record, principal capital steward, and final governance authority for institutional standards requiring ownership-level approval. No one laughed. No one whispered over it. Meredith's face went pale beneath her makeup. Caleb looked at Talia like he had misplaced the floor. Talia did not rise. She did not defend a thing. The institution had said it for. The recalibration happened in small, ugly, human ways. A sponsor who had passed Talia twice without greeting her suddenly angled his body toward her. Two members lowered their voices near Meredith. A senior partner removed his hand from Caleb's shoulder as if the gesture had become inconvenient. Julian handed Talia the corrected packet in full view of the room. "Whenever you're ready," he said. That was all. It was enough. Talia accepted it, and the people watching understood the exchange better than they wanted to. Caleb tried to recover with a polite nod toward someone across the aisle. But the nod found no easy landing. Meredith stood beside the entrance table, still holding the seating card she had tried to use on Talia. Suddenly, it looked less like order and more like evidence. A senior advisor approached Meredith before the applause fully settled. "Please send legal your access notes for this event," he said. Meredith's smile returned by instinct. "Of course. Is there a concern?" Graham answered from beside him. "There's a review." The difference landed hard. Meredith glanced toward Talia, maybe expecting anger, maybe hoping for mercy. Talia was speaking quietly with Julian and did not look over. That might have been worse. For years, Meredith had understood power as the right to decide who entered which room. Now the institution was asking how she had failed to recognize the person who owned the standards she claimed to protect. A coordinator removed Meredith's revised seating chart from the table and replaced it with the corrected one. No one announced her loss of authority. They simply stopped using it. Caleb's first instinct was to smile through it. He turned toward a sponsor near the aisle, the way he always did when a room got uncomfortable. But the sponsor's attention had moved past him, directly to Talia. That was new. Brielle saw it too. Her hand slipped from Caleb's arm. Not dramatically, just enough to stop looking staged. A man Caleb had introduced to the Institute 2 years earlier leaned toward someone and murmured, "So Brooks was the capital behind it?" Caleb heard every word. Talia didn't look triumphant. She looked still. That made it harder for him. For months, his story had been that he had moved on and moved up. Now the room understood he had been standing near power, not holding it. Brielle stepped away from Caleb before anyone asked her to. It was only a few feet, but it changed the picture. She watched Talia accept another quiet greeting, not with triumph, not with performance, but with the same control she had carried when everyone thought she had nothing left. Brielle looked back at Caleb. "You told me she was attached to the Institute because of the marriage." Caleb's mouth opened, then closed. "That's not the same as lying," he said finally. "No," Brielle said. "It's the kind of truth that leaves out the person who built the room." Meredith passed behind them without meeting either of their eyes. For the first time, Brielle didn't feel displayed. She felt used. And Talia, across the room, no longer looked like anyone's former place. By the time the session closed, the corrected hierarchy had entered more than the room. It was in the official packet. It was in the minutes. It was in the sponsor notes and the governance update that would circulate before anyone could soften what had happened. Talia stood near the stage while people approached her carefully, suddenly respectful in ways they should have known how to be before. Denise watched from the aisle, eyes bright but steady. Meredith kept her hands folded in front of her. Caleb stayed near the back with Brielle, no longer framed as the obvious center of anything. The truth had landed. But Talia knew something formal recognition couldn't fix. The room had not seen her until the records made it socially impossible not to. The Institute's response began before the gossip could outrun the paperwork. Graham issued a formal review of access procedures. Julian paused member relations authority over governance seating. Meredith's name came off the next leadership-facing event plan without announcement. No one shouted. No one made a scene. That was not Talia's style. And it was no longer Meredith's room to choreograph. In a closed meeting, Graham said, "The issue is not tone. It's judgment." Talia sat at the head of the table. "Then correct the judgment standard." Julian nodded once and made the note. The change moved through the institute quietly. But it moved. Access would no longer depend on who looked familiar to the gatekeeper. The system had been forced to answer to the woman who built it. Caleb found Talia near the side exit after the last advisor left. "Talia," he said. She stopped, but she didn't turn toward him like she owed him the whole of her attention. He swallowed. "I didn't think it would go that far." "That's not an apology." His face tightened. "I know." For once he had no polished version ready. No soft laugh. No smooth correction. "I let people assume things," he said. Talia looked at him then. "You didn't let them. You used it when it helped you." He took that in, and whatever answer he wanted disappeared. She didn't wait for remorse to become useful. She simply said, "My authority was never yours to explain away," and walked out before he could make her pain part of his reckoning. Brielle caught up with Talia outside the conference wing, away from the sponsors and cameras. "I owe you something," she said. Talia kept her expression neutral. "Do you?" Brielle looked down, then back up. "Maybe not forgiveness, but honesty. I liked what people thought I meant beside him." Talia didn't rescue her from the admission. Brielle continued. Quieter. "I didn't ask enough about what that story erased." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Talia said, "Don't build your place out of somebody else's absence." Brielle nodded, eyes wet but steady. It was not friendship. It was not absolution. But the comparison had lost its hold. Talia no longer had to stand in anyone's shadow, and Brielle no longer looked proud to be used as one. Denise waited until they were in the car before she spoke. The driver hadn't arrived yet, and the quiet felt different from all the quiet before it. "I saw your face in there," Denise said. Talia looked out the window. "Which part?" "The part where everybody finally knew, and it still hurt." Talia's mouth trembled once. She pressed her lips together, then stopped fighting it so hard. Denise reached across the seat and took her hand. "Baby, being powerful didn't mean that didn't wound you." Talia closed her eyes. "And being hurt," Denise added, "doesn't make you any less powerful." For the first time that day, Talia let the words reach her without straightening her spine against them. She was tired, she was seen. Both could be true. The next week, Talia walked into the institute through the main entrance. No one asked whether she belonged upstairs. The corrected governance record had already moved through the network. Meredith's role had been reduced to review. Caleb's name no longer opened doors with the same easy weight. Brielle began appearing at events under her own work, not as proof of anyone's replacement. Graham greeted Talia with a file. Julian waited beside the elevator. Denise had texted that morning, "Stand tall, but don't forget you can breathe." Talia smiled at that, then put the phone away. The room still had its polished floors, quiet money, and careful manners. But now it also had the truth. Talia stepped forward as founder, owner, and standard setter, not because the room finally approved of her, but because it could no longer pretend it had made her.